Alright, a couple of announcements before we get to the video. Part 2 of the crossbow shootout video should be ready soon. I have 2 of the targets back. When I get the 3rd target back, I'll get that video ready for you. And the other announcement is I have a new product coming out. It is a stirrup for the Ravin R500. Here's a few pictures of it. This is the product, and here's a few pictures of it mounted onto the crossbow. This is going to help with loading and unloading, hanging and storing your crossbow. It goes on and off real quick with a wing nut. So if you want to be entered for a chance to win that, all you have to do is send me an email at info@backyardbrothers.com and put the word ring in the subject line and you will be entered. Also, when you send me that email, I'll put you onto my weekly email list for my videos that go out. And anytime that you want to be on my list for my weekly emails, just send me an email at info@backyardbrothers.com. The winner of the stirrup will be announced in my YouTube video that goes out on the 29th at 7 p.m. And I'll also announce the winner on my Facebook page. You can find that in the description below. All right, on to our video. Before we use the laser Boresighter to sight in the Barnett, we're gonna check and see how straight this thing is. We're gonna use the lathe to find out how accurate the Boresighter is before we use it. So what I have is an arrow in the 3-jaw chuck, and when I spin it, it spins straight. Check that out. So no wobble on the arrow, no wobble on the point. And then we'll just feed in the tailstock and we'll put a little mark on this piece of white duct tape. That's our first step. Okay, you might not be able to see it, but it left a little indentation in the duct tape. So what we have is this little spot here. Make it a little bigger with the blue Sharpie. So now we're going to take our tailstock, we're going to move it back all the way, and we will wind it in some. So if our Boresighter is accurate, when we put it in the chuck, it should point an exact straight line right onto that dot, and we'll see how it is. And no matter what, we will then turn the light on and see if it spins true here, or in a circle, or not even on the white duct tape. So there's our blue dot, and when I first turned the laser on, you can see it's kind of above the dot, and when I turn the lathe on, it's definitely not on center. Now, if you left it like this, like if you didn't have a lathe or you didn't want to straighten it out, it would probably work just fine to get you hitting a target at 10 or 20 yards, but I just wanted to make it even better. So what I did was I turned the chuck slowly until the light was at the top, like that. And then I just took a rubber hammer and I just tapped down on this gently until it got to where my dot was directly on top of the blue dot. So now, after we use the rubber hammer, go back to our laser, turn it on, and it is directly on our dot. And now when we turn the lathe on, our dot is staying in center and spinning true. This is the target that I'm going to use for the laser Boresighter. I was going to aim the scope here and the laser here because of the height that the scope is above the arrow, but I couldn't really wrap my mind around that completely. So I made a little drawing. Like, this is my Boresighter and the light coming out of it, and then this is the scope being aimed down. So maybe since they're kind of aimed together, I know this should be coming straight out, that will maybe compensate and it would kind of work how it should. Other than the fact that I do think that the arrow is going to hit a little bit low. If the laser is perfect, I think the arrow is going to hit a little bit low because of gravity, but we're going to use this target, laser aimed here, scope aimed here, and maybe we'll end up between here and here, which is 1 inch. So I started out at 20 yards and I was adjusting my elevation backwards, and I thought this thing was a total piece of junk. So I brought it back to 10 yards, and it still seemed like the laser was at the ground and my aim point was at the top of the target. But then I looked through the scope where I could see the laser and my center aim point at 10 yards, and now it's dead on at 10 yards. So let's step back to 20. I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like now. So you probably can't focus on that, but we'll look at it up close here. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but right now I have my scope aimed right about here and my dot's right about here, and it might have moved a little bit because it's on a bag back there. But let's go back to 20 now and get this same setup. All right, so now we have the laser and the scope aimed at the same point at 20 yards. Let's see what happens. All right, so our right and left is pretty good, and I was aiming here, so it is 1.5 inches high. The difference between our scope and our arrow is 2.75 inches. So what does that tell us? I don't know. I guess it tells you at 20 yards you're probably going to hit high, so just you could aim it 1.5 inches low. I think the device works pretty good. It would be way easier to do this at night so you could actually see the laser, but I mean, it's safely getting us on the target at 20 yards. I don't even have to worry about starting at 10. As far as the setup, I'm not sure if you'd want to have your scope aimed here and your laser down here, or your scope here and your laser up here, but one of those two would get your shot really close to center. If you know for sure, you can go ahead and let us know in the comments. Let's grab our second arrow and see where it impacts. Okay, that's really close to where the laser was aimed at. The scope is above the arrow's coming in above the scope, just for note. All right, now I want to compare those two arrows to each other, and this is a little bit of an easier target to aim at. So I'm going to shoot both arrows at this spider. All right, aiming here, hitting about 1.5 arrow diameters high, and the crossbow's not sighted in yet. Okay, it's high. I'm going to try the other arrow one more time. And the other arrow one more time. These two shots felt good. One more shot. Looks like a same hole shot, of course, just to throw a wrench into things. Well, it's 20 yards, it's starting to rain. Let's move on to our next part. So I've been messing around with sighting it in and the speed ring a little bit. My last shot at 20 was dead on. My last shot at 30 was dead on because I went from 370 to 380 on the speed ring. Let's try 40. There is an annoying breeze right now. All right, 40, top left target. All right, so elevation pretty darn good. A little bit right, and the wind is blowing right. So I'm gonna leave it there for now. Okay, now for our speed tests. We're gonna shoot the XP370 first and then the Ravin. Remember, you don't wanna get like too close to the chronograph because your arrow is still accelerating if you get too close. So you want to be, I'm going to say, maybe 24 inches from the tip of your arrow. Let's see what happens here. All right, 375. That seems about right because Barnetts usually shoot a little bit faster than advertised. Let's try the Ravin. And let's get that piece of grass out of the freaking way. All right, 405. And while we're here, let's take a look at the target. So we just shot a medium weight arrow into the spider web at about, I don't know, 4 feet, and the arrow didn't go in real far and pretty easy to pull back out. So now what I have to do next is I have to get the ravin from 405 feet per second down to 375. All I'm going to do is put heavier field tips on it. That way when we do like a 60-yard competition between the ravin and the Barnett, it's a lot more fair because they'll be in the air for the same amount of time, which means that the wind will have the same amount of time to throw each arrow off course. Another thing I want to point out on the Barnett crossbow, and it's going to apply to a lot of Barnetts and a lot of other crossbows also, and this is another maintenance tip. So you want to keep your rail lubed, you want to keep your strings and cables waxed, but something that might get overlooked. Down here where your cables are, there's upward pressure onto the bottom of the rail. Just like your string has downward pressure onto the rail, your cables have upward pressure underneath the rail. And so I had my other Barnett out the other day, my older one, that had strings on it that should not be worn out yet, but right about here there was a string hanging down. So one thread of the cable was hanging down, and I lined it back up where it should be, and it ended up that it broke right here. So right at the contact point with the underbelly of the rail. So I'll show you what I did on this one. So I got a Q-tip, I loaded it up with wax, and I went in here and I loaded that all up with wax halfway through. Same thing over here, halfway through. And I went to the other side and got it, you know, halfway through here in front of the cables and halfway through here. See if we can see it right there behind the cables. So far, I'm really happy with the Barnett XP370. Let's not forget that this thing is made in the USA. So I think I paid around $260 for this thing. I don't think you can get a better crossbow made in the USA for that price. The trigger is definitely not as nice as the ravin, and it's going to take some time for me to get used to it. What I found with Barnetts, with their old trigger that had a lot of travel, it was still a nice trigger, and their new trigger, the Trigger Tech, which feels like it has no travel, both of them, it really depends on how you pull the trigger as to how accurate the crossbow is going to shoot. If you can do it the same and do it the right way each time, they seem to shoot pretty well. So on the older trigger, you just kind of had to pull it with like a medium squeeze, because if you pulled it really light and let it surprise you when it wet off, for me it was less accurate. This one I think is going to be the same way, but I'm not sure yet. I think it's just going to be like a confident medium speed pull to get accurate shots, but I'm going to have to shoot it more to find out. This one is going to be getting shot against the r29. I ordered custom arrows from John Smith. This is what they look like. They should be here in a few days. So the speeds we were getting out of this, it's advertised as 370, it's shooting 375. To me, why would you buy the Barnett XP380 if this one for less money is going to be shooting 375? But maybe it's going to shoot 385 and that's what you want. So yeah, that's part 2 with the XP370. Part 3 is going to be a shootout with the Ravin R29. Thanks for watching.